Nomiki show. The Nomiki show. Clash momentarily for class solidarity. Cash circulating, give the masses back its currency. Greed from elites, oligarchs stay fed. Deep state, fake fed, everybody break bread. Racism, homophobia, sexism, religion in this melting pot we live in. Time to build a new system, unionize labor rights. Highlight the issue, talking heads left is best. The saga continues. The Nomiki show. The Nomiki show. The Nomiki show. The Nomiki show. momentarily for class solidarity. Cash circulating, give the masses back its currency. Greed from elites, oligarchs stay fed. Deep state, fake fed, everybody break bread. Racism, homophobia, sexism, religion in this melting pot we live in. Time to build a new system, unionize labor rights. Highlight the issue, talking heads left is best. The saga continues. The Nomiki Show.
I recently was given the opportunity to appear on the Dan Abrams Show. You guys, if you don't know, Dan Abrams is a well-known legal analyst. He's been around probably, as long as I've been conscious of cable news, he has been around on TV, talking about legal issues, whether it's at ABC, I think he was at GMA for a while, Good Morning America. He has a podcast on Sirius XM, and now he hosts a show on News Nation, and I was invited on the Dan Abrams Show. It's sort of a mix of politics and law. And he wanted me on to talk about Michelle Fields, who is one of the names that is being floated around and really advocated for by, in particular, South Carolina Congressman Jim Clyburn. Well, Michelle Fields is Clyburn's choice for Supreme Court justice. Now, we know that President Biden has said he's going to choose not just a woman of color, but an African-American woman to serve on the Supreme Court, which would be incredibly historic. So Michelle Fields is at the top of the list right now. Well, union leaders like Sarah Nelson and other unions, public sector worker union members and leaders, as well as progressive organizations like Our Revolution, have said, hey, hang on a second. Michelle Fields is an interesting choice. She has a very interesting background. Maybe we should take a pause and think about what it means to have Michelle Fields on the Supreme Court, which of course happens. But in every situation, whenever we have nominations to the Supreme Court, there are people out there saying, hold up, what about this? What about this paper that they wrote in law school? What about this court case that they argued when they were attorneys? What about, this association that they've had, in their social circles? That kind of stuff, and personal history of, Clarence Thomas, notably so. Michelle Fields has been a corporate attorney. She was a corporate attorney. She was a partner at a law firm. And what I'm going to do right now is, that's the setup for this clip. You can watch me discuss this with Dan Abrams. Dan Abrams is definitely more moderate. He openly says so. And he thinks that Michelle Fields, who is being supported in a bipartisan way, Lindsey Graham of South Carolina said that he would support her. He thinks that she is the smartest pick to get through the Supreme Court. My perspective is very different, but you'll hear that. But one thing I will add to it is, why do we make it about bipartisanship when Democrats nominate Supreme Court justices? We have the Senate. Why? We staged a fit for sure, but it's only a bipartisan game when we're in control. And I find that quite funny. So let's roll this clip.
Now that President Biden has promised a black woman on the Supreme Court, there is a relatively short list of top candidates for the job. But for some on the left, a highly qualified, left-leaning black woman is still not enough. One of the leading candidates is federal Judge J. Michelle Childs, who served for 11 years on the U.S. District Court of South Carolina and was recently nominated to the D.C. Circuit Court of Appeals. But now she's drawing heat from some left-wing activists concerned that she isn't liberal enough. They're upset that she was, a successful practicing lawyer who made money representing clients at a prestigious law firm. The way successful lawyers do. Pro-labor activists are fretting about her past work at a corporate law firm whose clients include employers accused of discrimination and labor law violations. The activists say the work is disqualifying. Yes, they believe representing corporate clients should disqualify a lawyer from sitting on the Supreme Court. Joseph G. Varghese, the executive director of Our Revolution, a group founded by Bernie Sanders, has been one of Childs' most vocal opponents, tweeting, quote, Joe Biden vowed to be the most pro-union ever. It's imperative he keep this pledge by nominating a pro-union justice. J. Michelle Childs is anything but. Workers do not need another anti-labor justice actively opposing the very protections POTUS promised to uphold and expand. Representatives for labor groups, including the General Counsel for the American Federation of Government Employees and the president of the Association of Flight Attendants, have also come out against Childs, arguing that she is anti-union. In addition, some on the far left have criticized Childs' rulings in criminal justice cases. They argue that she's too tough on criminals, pointing to a series of rulings, some where she was later overturned by a higher court, in which she denied or rejected the motions of convicted felons who argued they were being treated too harshly. But the primary argument against Childs is that because she once worked at a law firm and represented employers, that she can't possibly adjudicate those types of employment cases fairly. So I guess that would mean anyone who's ever been a criminal defense lawyer would have to be excluded from consideration because they represented criminals. I mean, who wants a criminal lover on the court, right? It just seems like nothing is pure enough for some on the far left. But maybe the scary thing to them is that Judge Childs might even have some bipartisan support, which must be really bad, which must mean she's the devil. Senator Lindsey Graham has been a prominent supporter of Childs' candidacy. Joining us now is Nomiki. She's the director of Matriarch, a progressive group which supports working-class women running for office, and she opposes Judge Childs. Nomiki, thank you so much for coming on the show. All right, I've been ranting here for a bit, so let me let you go. What am I getting wrong here?
Well, I mean, first off, thanks for having me, Dan. Yeah, I think we could both agree that courts evolve with the times, you know, whether it's resistance from choices that from the far right who refused to evolve with the times, like Amy Coney Barrett or Clarence Thomas. You know, all of those had to deal with social issues related to gender mostly. Well, right now we're in a moment where big business has gone out of control. There have been record profits during this COVID pandemic. You've seen CEOs make more money than ever. And of course, workers are really suffering under these circumstances. But in particular, when you look at labor, the labor force, it is majority made up of women of color. And so when Joe Biden says he's going to choose an African-American woman to serve on this court as the most pro-union president ever, you'd think that he would choose one of the many other women who've been presented who've been very good on issues when it comes to labor, representing most women of color in this country, frontline workers in particular. Unfortunately, Childs, while she has an impressive career, 23 out of the 25 cases that were registered with Bloomberg Law from when she was at when she was a partner at Nexon, Pruitt, Jacobs, and Pollard, she was representing employers against employees in discrimination cases, in union busting cases. I don't know if that's exactly the type of choice, that represents these times.
Well, let me ask you this. So here's my concern. My concern is once you start punishing a nominee for the clients they represent, and I say this across the board evenly. I mean, I don't like it when the right does this. They find some little case that someone argued and they say, aha, see, this person's a bad person because they took a case. She was a lawyer. She worked at a big law firm. She was really successful. She made a lot of money doing it by representing clients, which is what lawyers do. And now it sounds like what you're saying is, and that, of course, should be held against her.
Well, it's not like lawyers are forced to take every case presented before them. You know this very well. She has a choice. She has a choice which law firm she works for. Yeah. Is it a labor law firm? Is it one that deals with employee discrimination? Or unfortunately, she chose cases representing big business and union busting. And, in cases she lost where the employees won when facing discrimination time and time again. So this is a consequence of choices in life. And I think if you're going to serve in the highest court of land, you should represent the times. And this is a time when workers really don't have enough power in the workplace.
What do you make of my example about a criminal defense lawyer? Using your theory, using your philosophy here, it would seem that I don't think any criminal defense lawyer, anyone who's ever represented a criminal defendant, should be considered for the court because the criminal defense lawyers are typically representing people who are guilty, not always, but typically. They're representing people who are guilty, and they're giving them their day in court, right? They're representing them. And according to you, they're choosing to represent these people who are criminals. How could any criminal defense lawyer ever be considered for any judgeship using that? Right.
Well, I think we know that our criminal justice system is severely broken, and how many of those criminals are coming from communities that have been targeted with outdated criminal justice laws. Well, it does have something to do with it because these are individuals who've been born into circumstances where they've been targeted and often don't have the resources. Big business is not some sort of community that doesn't have the resources. She has a choice. She made a choice to go to a law firm. She probably made a significant amount of money and got a lot lot of experience
Yep.
representing business. But when you're serving, the majority of criminals or or those who are tried as criminals in our legal system right now are not coming from the wealthiest communities. There's obviously some exceptions, but they're mainly coming from communities of color with outdated criminal justice laws.
Wait, but you've just justified sort of committing crimes, right? And I hear you, because I'm not suggesting that you have.
How many
You
of those
basically told
crimes-
me that everyone who's charged with a crime, we have to look at why they committed that crime because of this problem and that
if
problem,
they've
and as a
actually
result,
committed that
you
crime.
can. Right. You can totally understand why any lawyer would represent them because, of course, it must not be their fault. It must be the fault of their upbringing, et cetera. And I understand that that's an argument to make.
What is the crime on the books? What is distinguishing what a crime is? We know that in New York, there used to be stop and frisk. That is no longer something that is used. The easy.
Right.
There
are statutes, right?
Yes, exactly.
There are statutes. And if you violate a statute and you commit a crime, you get arrested. I mean, come on. That part of it
Big business can write their own statutes. Here's the difference. If you're growing up in the South Bronx, you're getting targeted in a completely different way than if you're growing up in Beverly Hills.
Right. Again, the wide swath of presumptions of everyone who's charged with crimes must have been targeted if they live in the South Bronx. That it must be that anyone this is the problem, in my view, more broadly with absolutes, right? And that's my fundamental problem with what we're talking about here, which is this lack of ability to say, okay, maybe this is a candidate who can actually get bipartisan support. Maybe this is a candidate we're definitely left-leaning, but can bring people to say, okay, this is not going to be as divisive a candidate as Joe Biden could possibly pick. And that's why, for me, as someone, and I say this, by the way, I say this to people on the right as well, that I look for candidates who are more towards the middle, that I like Supreme Court justices, I like political candidates, et cetera. And that's more of a reflection of America. And it sounds like, again, and maybe this is an unfair characterization, so I'll let you respond. It sounds like you're kind of trying to pull Biden much further to the left, even though the country's not there.
I would firmly disagree. I think that the majority of Americans in this country are workers who want to be protected. I think the majority of Americans in this country are worried about their paycheck and the ability to survive when labor laws are under attack. What she represents is big business, which the majority of Americans on the right and the left probably don't side with. She has worked for big business, a law firm which goes against the PRO Act, which is incredibly popular and needed while labor is weaker than ever. This is not a conversation over social issues. This is a conversation over whether or not we have a court that represents big business or the American people. Big business gets to write their own laws. They get to hire whatever attorneys they probably want, the best in the business. Most individuals in this country do not have that opportunity. Most individuals in this country don't have a say or a lobby pushing for a certain judge. And for President Biden right now, when you look at the lower courts, he actually has sided with the workers when it comes to his nomination. So this would be really working against his legacy. And frankly, I'm concerned that if business can just buy the courts, what are we left as a country?
Again, business buying the courts. But you mean they'd have to be buying Biden? Of course they're going to be lobbying for it, but then they're going to be buying Biden, right? So anyway, look, but here's what's good about this is you are clearly super smart and this is super interesting. And that's why we liked having you on the show. I appreciate you coming on. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Dan. It was a good debate. Our next guest is Grace Blakely. Grace Blakely is a staff writer for Tribune and the author of Stolen: How to Save the World from Financialization. Great question. Also has recent pieces out in Jacobin, of course. One titled Raising Interest Rates is about screwing workers, and the other, Billionaires Absurd and Growing Wealth Undercuts Democracy. Here, Grace. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you so much for having me on the show. It's great to finally be able to join you.
I know. We've tried many times, and you know, the universe has like lots of other things in store for us. So this inflation issue is unbelievable. We opened the show. I had a conversation, talked about how inflation is being used as a weapon, and simultaneously the weaponization of supply chain issues are used as a weapon for political divides and organizing and splinters. Tell us a little bit, you know, what's behind this quote unquote inflation conversation.
Yeah, it's interesting actually. That piece that I had in Jacobin in the US, it was entitled Raising Interest Rates as a Way to Screw Workers. And in the UK, it was entitled Is a Form of Class War.
Oh, interesting.
I think that was kind of interesting, an interesting little difference there between like the US and the UK context. But I mean, basically, that is what it is. If you go back to the period during which this narrative that we're seeing being rolled out again was formed, it was the 1970s and 80s, when you had this argument being kind of trotted out by what was then seen as kind of very radical element of the right, what we now know as the kind of neoliberal movement. And their argument was that inflation, this is Milton Friedman saying, is always and everywhere a monetary phenomenon. Now, what was going on in the 1970s was that there was a dramatic spike in inflation, and that was driven by the formation of OPEC. That's that group of oil producing countries that got together, formed this group and said, we're going to control oil prices, basically. So you had two big spikes in oil prices in the early 1970s, and that drove up inflation for everything, because what are we learning now? What we've known for a very long time, it's that energy prices, and particularly oil prices, feed into the prices of so many other things. Now, that's particularly true for oil because it's used to make so many different things. Like oil is not just the fuel you put in your cars. It's also hydrocarbons in plastics. It's natural gas used for fertilizer. So fossil fuels are used across our economy. And also bear in mind that they're really important when we're thinking about global logistics and transportation, and that our economies, the UK and also the US, very, very dependent on imports. So all of that means that energy prices, particularly fossil fuel prices, feed into inflation. This happened in the 1970s, and that very radical right-wing movement said, this is because of unions. This is because workers are demanding too higher wages. And at that time, we had in the UK, and to a lesser extent in the US, relatively strong labor movements that could really kind of bring the economy to a grinding halt if they demanded wage increases that the bosses didn't want to give. So this was really seen as a kind of wedge to basically divide public opinion and bash the labor movement. And it worked basically because a lot of the tools that had previously been used to combat inflation during the post-war period stopped working when you had this big change in energy prices. And really the result of that, in part, it was a significant part of why we got the neoliberal revolution, was to do with all these crises around how do you deal with inflation, and also the kind of general sense that the labor movement had gotten out of control. Here we are today, and the right is once again, even after a decade of wage stagnation in the UK, even after in the US, the average worker before the pandemic was as well off in purchasing power parity terms as they were in the 1970s. Even after all of that wage stagnation, they're trying to roll this argument out again. And that's why it's class war.
Well, and it's interesting. It is class war, but I love that in the American version, they say it's about screwing workers. And I want to highlight screwing workers because I think that the right wing, which I opened with on the show, the right wing understands that they have a problem in that they're trying to appear populist. Simultaneously, there's this labor movement that's growing. It is nowhere where it needs to be because of the failures of the last 40 years of the Democratic Party, siding with neoliberals and basically kicking out labor from the party while bringing in lobbyists who are union busters, in some cases lawyers who are union busters in the Democratic Party, all around the late 1970s when you talk about this period. So these things all happened at the same time. But they know that they need, or at least the Steve Bannons of the world who are organizing this type of Republican Party, know that they need to have a robust populist movement that is disruptive enough and votes enough in specific districts, because it's all gerrymandered in the United States, that it's almost like death by a thousand cuts. They just need enough. And when I see the truckers in Canada, which of course now there's threats that they're going to be coming here for Super Bowl, they're going to be I was just actually at the Canadian border yesterday in outside of Buffalo and Niagara Falls, and we decided not to go across to Canada because of the truckers who were protesting at the border. And it's very fascinating because truckers are traditionally more conservative. They listen to conservative talk radio on these long haul routes, for several hours. They're on the road like 350 days a year or something like a little over 300 days a year. They're listening to conservative talk radio. But there's an intersection between supply chain, which is, people are saying is the excuse for inflation, and workers' rights and mandates, and all of these things are intersecting. So the worker aspect, to me, this is if the workers are frustrated, the Republican Party, the right wing, has found a way for what is horrible conditions for these truckers to channel into mandates, and then channeling the economy, using the economic situation to create a little mini movement, and then continue to blame the Democrats for inflation and the economy in an election year. Does that make sense?
Absolutely. I think what you've kind of put your finger on there is a problem that the left have had for a long time, which is that we tend to assume that any form of economic crisis that tends to squeeze workers will benefit the left. And that is just not true. It's not true today. It wasn't true after the financial crisis. And the reason for that is that the response to any crisis, the response to any kind of, crisis in living standards, financial crisis, whatever, the way that people make sense of that and the way that they respond to that will depend, to a great extent on the ideas that are, again, in the words of Milton Friedman, lying around at the time. The left, up until a few years after the financial crisis, did not have a strong populist narrative that was able to explain why people's living standards were falling in a way that people could relate to. The right had a very easy, very powerful, and very potent narrative. It was some sort of mix between the left, the center left has spent too much money. It's out of control government spending. That's the reason for this problem. That's the reason for the financial crisis. And also, they've been letting in loads of immigrants, and those are the people who are stealing your jobs, using public services, using your healthcare. And without a powerful counter narrative to explain falling living standards in another way, that was what people immediately and initially latched onto. What you saw, years after the financial crisis, when we'd had the chance to build up a more powerful movement, Jeremy Corbyn in the UK, Bernie Sanders, Podemos, Syriza, all of these new movements that emerged all around the world, very much on the left, very much from a socialist perspective, said actually, no, the reason that you are doing badly is because all of the benefits of growth are being captured by an elite at the very top of our society. The same elite that caused the financial crisis, the same elite that imposed austerity, the same elite that has, been implicated in causing the climate crisis. All of these crises that we're dealing with today have been caused by basically a small number of people at the very top of society who are in control of our big corporations, our big banks, and the revolving door that exists between those institutions and the government. And that narrative was very powerful and very popular, but for a number of reasons, which we probably don't have time to go into today, it wasn't the one that ended up sticking. Yet, I think today, the right is aware that that there is some kind of latent enthusiasm for this way of explaining things, particularly when, we've seen over the course of the last couple of years during the pandemic, billionaire wealth skyrocket. Right. A few people do extremely well, while others were made to, again, bear the costs of this crisis. So as you say, they have to kind of find all these little ways of cutting up that potential coalition, because that's what they're really trying to do. They are really trying to undermine class solidarity. Bernie actually had a great quote, which was something along the lines of, if there's going to be a class war in this country, it's about time the working classes won it, which I think really gets that point. There's much class solidarity among this elite, and it's their job really to keep working people disorganized, and not having that kind of coherent narrative.
That's right. And it's almost like political jujitsu, right? They're taking an energy that exists and channeling it into something, which is what, Trump did so well. It's the Mexicans' fault. It's not, your employer's fault. The good news is that a lot of people are waking up to that's just BS. The bad news is that's not how electoral politics works in this country. You just need enough votes, not all of the votes or a majority of the votes. You just need enough in a coalition. I want to end with one question. I know we don't have a lot of time today, but love to have you on again, because this is
I would love to come back.
Big conversation, super fascinating.
The smart women about,
yes.
socialism.
Yes, it's my favorite. But the other aspect of this is, and it again goes back to the late 70s, when a lot of these free trade agreements took hold. And I think about it every single time I hear about the supply chain is, we're obviously Western, northern capitalist countries that are consumer-based economies. Our economy is entirely consumer-based, as much as they want to manipulate it in different ways. And free trade and the supply chain all intersect here and this all kind of came about at the same time when labor, of course, was attacked. And in 2016, during the presidential race, this was a big dividing line between the Clinton coalition and the Bernie coalition. Was you had some more progressive labor unions and membership, even if their leaders did not endorse Bernie Sanders. The membership recognized that the free trade agreements of the late 70s and, of course, mid 90s, early 90s made a huge difference in how strong labor is in this country. Well, now we're seeing, if we haven't seen the last 2 years during the shutdowns, we're seeing it immediately. So, they're blaming, the elites are blaming, the CEOs are blaming the supply chain, which is their economic model, by the way, but they're also increasing the costs while they're making record profits. So which is it? Is this a dilemma for them, or is this an opportunity for us to say, no matter who you blame, you're at fault?
Yeah, obviously a big part of why we experience such kind of economic turmoil when different parts of the global economy shut down at different times was because of the just extraordinary interconnectedness of the world economy. Mm-hmm. And even, the virus itself spread through supply, through kind of trading routes from kind of city to city to city and then out from there. So, these kind of the classic thing to say at the beginning of the pandemic was we are all going to be affected by this because of the way that, these just-in-time supply chains work. Businesses are keeping less inventory. They're relying on shipments coming in very, very quickly to translate those inputs into the products they're producing. Another really interesting part of this is actually the way that global shipping has changed.
Right.
You've got these huge container ships that have to be very carefully organized when they're going in from one port out of another port. They take days and days to unload. A load of those ships just ended up basically floating around the ocean or just docked somewhere with all the workers trapped on board.
Can I just add something to this? I flew in yesterday, as I mentioned, into New York City, and we were going into JFK, and it was at nighttime, and I saw these ships, and I was like, what are they doing? They're just sitting. And of course, all these things were going in my mind. There were dozens of them. I'm sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt, but I just saw that last night.
Actually, I personally just am very, very interested in shipping just as like a thing because it's a fascinating thing. Containerization is one of these really not spoken about things that just transformed the global economy. And if you look at what's happened to global shipping over the course of the last couple of years, A, it's been massively disrupted, but B, the working conditions for some of these workers who are often sailing on these boats, which are, on the seas under flags of convenience, which basically means, they are using the labor laws of countries with the worst kind of labor laws that you can imagine. Some of them have literally been trapped on boats for years, unable to get off because they weren't able to kind of get off at the ports because the countries wouldn't let them in.
Wow,
it's really horrendous conditions, and what were already very difficult conditions for these workers. So, that whole model has been really pushed to breaking point, and we're going to continue to see this, I think, because, a kind of system as intricate and complex as global logistics can't just be shut down and then resurrected as it was before. We're really going to have to rethink how a lot of this stuff works. So supply chain issues are a massive thing, are going to continue to be a massive thing. And that coordination, which allows, chip manufacturers in Southeast Asia to coordinate with manufacturers in another part of Asia, to coordinate with consumers and managers in different parts of the world, that's all going to take a very long time really to reconstruct, to make it work again in any meaningful way. But the other thing, I think, when we talk about supply chains, we're maybe not, we could overemphasize that as actually one of the big causes of inflation, because if you really drill down into the data and you look at what's actually causing inflation, what the consumer is feeling, it is energy prices. And this really, I think, does give us a bit of a wake-up call. It's that we need to come up with a more sustainable, cheaper source of energy that can last us into the future, and also kind of allow us to decarbonize. Because oil prices sunk to zero during the pandemic. Everyone was like, great, it's the end of big oil. Of course, they immediately rebounded when economic growth started again. And now we're seeing this massive uptick, which is all benefiting the big oil companies. Exxon had its most profitable year in 7 years. All the big oil companies are having bumper profits. They're distributing it to shareholders. They're largely not using it to try and decarbonize as they promised they would. We really need to just get these companies out of our economy and start transitioning towards renewables.
You can't just put a sweater on, as Jimmy Carter said. Even though my heating company, my power company, emailed me today saying, we know that rates are higher than normal, as I'm wearing a sweater. My goodness, just stop consuming. I think that's the alternative. Maybe Joe Biden should say, guys, maybe you don't order everything off of Amazon every 5 seconds. I'm just kidding. It would be nice if you actually crack down on these companies. Grace, super insightful, rapid round conversation. Thank you for joining us. Let's have you on again very soon. And have a great night. I know you're out in the UK right now, so
thank you.
Thanks for joining us.
Bye.
We will be right back after this quick little break. All right, welcome back to the Nomiki Show. Indigo Oliver is a journalist who's written for pieces for The Guardian, The Nation, Jacobin, The Conversationalist, and right now has a piece out in these times titled "A Landmark Bill Would Outlaw Bosses Cutting Off Healthcare to Striking Workers." My goodness, just another reminder that our labor laws are extraordinarily weak in this country, and there's very little oversight. Indigo, thank you for joining us and for writing this piece.
Thank you for having me.
So I guess we should start off with what are they allowed to do when workers strike? And are these legal strikes, or are these like the illegal strikes that occur with like teachers unions and public sector workers?
Well, what I was talking about mostly was legal strikes. But when you do go on strike, what happens is your pay gets cut off. That's pretty standard practice. And in certain cases, employers have the option to cut your health care off as well. And it's been used as a threat, and was recently used as a threat at the recent John Deere strike. It is completely legal for them to do so. In certain cases, unions like the UAW, which are much larger, have strike funds. So they will support their workers through like small weekly payments, and then will also in some cases cover their healthcare through COBRA benefits. But I think this is really a game changer, just because it takes away one of these key strike breaking tactics that we've seen companies use in recent years, or in decades really, but especially over the last couple of years.
So the National Labor Relations Board, the NLRB, is falls under the Biden administration, and of course was weakened under Trump. And I know a lot of the Biden administration hasn't really fully empowered the NLRB in many ways. Even in the last year, but the PRO Act, for instance, is this bill that is sort of like MIA right now, I guess. I don't know if you have the latest on the PRO Act, but it could obviously strengthen the NLRB and labor laws for striking. Is this a bill that could be passed in case the PRO Act doesn't get passed, or it gets broken up into pieces, or it just takes several years, while conditions are obviously very not great right now in the country?
So I think this is something that we should look at as additional legislation to strengthen worker organizing alongside the PRO Act. The question of how likely it is to pass along with the PRO Act is kind of like a separate story. And I don't think Democrats have really done enough to push for the legislation that they want to see and kind of like strategically negotiate with people like Joe Manchin and Sinema. But yeah, I think this is definitely one piece in a puzzle to strengthen labor overall. The one thing that I would say, though, is that we shouldn't rely on the NLRB too much to strengthen labor as a whole. I think the only way that we're really going to see that in a big way is if masses of organizers organize at the grassroots level and kind of demand the things that they're owed, like healthcare and the right to collectively bargain.
I've heard from Starbucks workers who I was in Buffalo this past weekend, as I mentioned in the previous segment, and learned that they would hit a lot of roadblocks and have a lot of issues in terms of strengthening their organizing, and they've been very successful, partly due to the kind of conditions and the size of a store and how these union efforts have spread so fast. It's not striking, but it's organizing. But they have said, like, if the PRO Act was passed, this would be much easier. I'm curious, like, have you interviewed any of the congressional members who co-sponsored this bill, or do you know sort of what their mentality is behind why this bill now, and are they preparing for a fight with the PRO Act?
Yeah, so there's an interesting story behind the bill. The key person who introduced the legislation, Sydney Axne, Representative Sydney Axne, a Democrat in the House, actually oversees the district where a number of the John Deere striking workers were living in. So her constituents were going through this. Again, John Deere threatened to cut their health care off. And when she heard from her constituents, she was inspired to introduce this legislation. And she started having conversations with some of her colleagues on the Hill and heard that they had also had constituents facing similar issues in recent years. Another one of the co-sponsors oversaw the district where the Kellogg's striking workers, part of the Kellogg's workers were striking. About 1,400 Kellogg's workers lost their health care during the course of that strike. So that was a big issue. So in terms of a strike, in terms of a fight, I'm not entirely sure. I was able to get some answers from Representative Axne through email. Mm-hmm. And when I asked her about how likely she thinks the bill is to pass, her answer was sort of, well, with any legislation, introduction is the first step. So I think Democrats are pretty aware that this is going to be an uphill battle, as it has been, especially with holdouts like Manchin and Sinema.
What I don't understand is, how is this even legal? I mean, there is isn't there a mandate for employers to provide health care if an employee is working? I mean, it's not, you don't know how long the strike is going to be. It could be, a week, 2 weeks, a month, but I assume, especially the Kellogg's workers and the John Deere workers, these are employees. I assume they're not at will employees. They're on salary. So how do they get away with this?
I mean, we have a system of labor laws, really business laws in this country that favor the employer. So again, like I said, when you're on strike, you don't get paid. And I think that kind of in the employer's mind, pay is linked to healthcare. So it's like, if you're not working, you're not going to get the pay or the benefits that we're giving you. Again, not every employer cuts healthcare during a strike. It is specifically used as a strike breaking tactic when they know it's going to be a struggle with workers and want them to get them to the negotiating table and to just accept a contract and move on. But I think really it points to a larger issue in this country, which is employer-based healthcare. You know, if we did not have an employer-based healthcare system in this country, overnight workers would already be in a better position to negotiate over things that have nothing to do with healthcare, just because they wouldn't have that threat looming over them. I also wanted to mention that, during Striketober, again, John Deere and Kellogg's workers were among some of the bigger striking groups. But during that time, healthcare was actually a huge issue that was being negotiated over at the contract table. Again, like John Deere, for instance, one of their big issues that they were negotiating over was higher premiums. They wanted to raise workers' cost of their premiums to 20%, which was a huge hike. A lot of workers have been complaining about just poor coverage overall. And UAW retirees in more recent years have also lost retiree health and benefits. So once you retire, you're no longer have health insurance.
Well, I mean, what's also crazy about this is you would think it's in the employer's interest to fight for something like Medicare for all, because it makes your workers less likely to be dissatisfied with the company. If the limited wages, which are already cutting, are not going to just like survival. So, never made sense to me at all. I never understood why big business didn't say Medicare for all is great for business. It's great for everybody. I think it's a bit of a catch-22 because, again, healthcare is a huge cost to employers, especially for large corporations. It's a huge cost. On the other hand, if they wanted to have a Medicare for all system, they know that they would have to pay more in taxes. And it also kind of just goes back to this ideological issue where even if we are spending more than twice the normal OECD country in healthcare costs because we have private health insurance, it's too close to socialism for people to really get behind. Interesting. So in terms of next steps for this bill, where does it go?
So it was recently introduced in the House. That was February 2nd. Representative Axnay is confident that it should be introduced in the Senate pretty soon. I'm not really sure where it's going to go. Honestly, not many people have covered it. I haven't heard a lot about it outside of like press releases and statements from unions. There have been a number of unions that have endorsed the bill. So the UAW, the AFL-CIO, the United Mine Workers, and a number of others have come behind this legislation. So I think we're probably going to see some cooperation between labor and representatives, and hopefully, rank and file members will be trying to support this in grassroots ways as well.
My God. It's good to see the organizing. It's good to see some members, but obviously Washington's at a standstill right now. Really interesting conversation. Go check out this article in These Times right now. It appeared on February 4th. Indigo Oliver authored a landmark bill would outlaw bosses cutting off healthcare to striking workers. Hopefully many, many bills like this in conjunction with the PRO Act, which hopefully will get a little bit more attention soon. Indigo Oliver, thank you for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
All right, we will be right back with Jamie Peck. See this? Yeah, this is what happens when you don't take care of yourself. Uh, it was a strain that might be much worse. It's extremely painful, and I'm not wrapping it right. As you can see, I probably have to tighten it. But that pain has really not been as intense as it should be, especially at night, given the scenario, because I am using Sunset Lake CBD. I have been doing the drops in my water at night. I'm putting the cream, the ointment on my hand because it is Sunset Lake CBD with arnica. It is really helping my what I think is probably nerve at this point, the pain that I'm facing at night that just like pulses. It pulses. So anyways, that is my personal recommendation right now. Sunset Lake CBD is a fantastic product that I discovered probably at the beginning of the pandemic. There was a lot of anxiety at the beginning of the pandemic. And, I heard about it through Sam Cedar. He swore by it. He said, no, it's different than other CBD, which I had tried and wasn't really into. I didn't want to go the other route and be a little hazy all day. This has been an incredible solution. Not only do I use it to help me sleep at night and with pain and joint issues, but it's a calming. Like, it's really, when I'm feeling stressed, I sometimes will take one of their CBD joints and it just chills me out a little bit because these are stressful times. Sunset Lake CBD is a farmer-owned company that ships their craft CBD directly from their farm in Vermont to your door. They have all types of products, the tinctures, the gummies, the salves, coffee. My mom swears by that. And so does Dorsey. They can drink, you get the stimulation from coffee, but not the jitters. So it's a perfect way to like keep drinking coffee all day long and not feel like, you're going to have a heart attack, basically. They originally took this amazing farm in Vermont that was a Ben & Jerry's farm, and they diversified it and decided to grow premium hemp. Not only that, they're a great company because, first off, when you're supporting them, you're supporting rural agriculture and economy. And in their company, their minimum wage is actually $15 minimum wage, but not just that, their employees own the majority of the company, and they support independent media that supports good labor standards, like our show, The Majority Report, and The David Pakman Show. For right now, if you go to sunsetlakecbd.com and you type in Nomi, Nomi, you will get 20% off of your entire order. Just go to sunsetlakecbd.com and type in Nomi, and you will get 20% off your entire order. All right, welcome back. Sophie Hurwitz is a journalist based out of St. Louis, Missouri. She specializes in coverage of student movements, identity-based coverage of LGBT and Jewish issues, and works at the intersections of culture and environment. She has a piece out right now in The Nation titled "Amazon Warehouse Workers Want to Feel Safe." What a thought. Workers want to feel safe. Sophie, thanks for joining us today.
Thank you for having me.
So, you write this piece. Amazon is obviously not known for supporting its workers, but they have incredible campaign efforts to trick you otherwise, even if you are a worker. I mean, I was watching an ad yesterday on TV. Mm-hmm. I didn't know it was an Amazon ad. I caught it like midway through saying, we're so proud that we have a $15 minimum wage. And in many cities where it's more expensive to live, minimum wage is even higher. Mm-hmm. And we provide health insurance and we pay for college. And I was like, what is this? We are Amazon.
Yeah.
We also provide you water bottles to pee in when you're at the warehouse.
Mm-hmm. It's ubiquitous. Absolutely. Yeah.
So this is this is real. This one protest here stems out of this horrific situation that happened a few months ago, in which a warehouse collapsed on workers when many workers were asked to stay inside against really their own will. What's happening here right now?
What's happening with Amazon in Edwardsville?
Yes, exactly.
Well, I would say that people feel betrayed because, like you said, these ads basically telling people that this is one of the best jobs you can get, especially in a place like St. Louis. Like, we are a post-industrial, smaller sized metro area. There aren't a whole lot of jobs, especially jobs that you don't need an advanced degree for, that pay as well as Amazon does. That part is true. But then, like you said, the ads kind of promise that this will also bring a better life. It'll bring safety. It'll bring security. And I think that this warehouse collapse and the sort of uncaring showed to what workers need and even to workers' lives proves that that is not the case.
This was, of course, a tornado that hit the facility, and that day that occurred, I believe it was December 10th. Yeah, December 10th was the same day that the CEO of Amazon, the founder, former CEO, I don't know what he is now, actually, but
Mr.
the founder,
Bezos, yeah.
Mr. Bezos, the man of Amazon, the founder, he was landing his spaceship.
Yeah, it really struck me how long it took him to acknowledge what was happening, especially I'm pretty young. I know a lot of people that work at Amazon that are very much just like me. And I was seeing tweets that were like, oh my God, I'm one warehouse over. I could have been flattened. People trying to figure out where their cousins were, where their family members were. And meanwhile, Jeff Bezos is launching his rocket.
Literally.
Yeah.
I mean, it's almost poetic. In a really dark way. But when the rocket landed or whatever, I don't know what you actually say. You say landed, parked. I have no idea.
I'm not sure either. I'm not a rocket scientist.
Exactly. And I'm not a billionaire. So when they landed the rocket and he got off and he was doing this press conference, it was eerie how out of touch he was, because even one of the women next to him, who was, she has experience in space and was working with him, he said something like, and we wouldn't be able to do this without the workers of Amazon.
Yeah.
And her jaw dropped on stage because, of course, this had occurred, not like during the time they were there. And of course, he didn't acknowledge the workers who had been killed. So, this is not a great media narrative for him. Let's just start off with that.
No.
So what are they doing there now? I mean, this is, you had workers who died. Their family has been affected. One of the workers' father said, my daughter was not expendable at a rally on January 27th. What are they trying to do? Are they just raising awareness? Is there a unionization effort there now?
I think what they want is primarily for Amazon to keep their promises from those ads. I think what they want is for Amazon to keep their promises and for Amazon to actually deliver on the working environment that they promised. That could certainly involve unionization. I know that many, many different workers' unions, and I think this is a really interesting point, have been supporting the Edwardsville Amazon workers. Like, you have people across industries. You've got fast food workers, you've got Teamsters, you've got, sheet metal workers, and they all came through to this rally. I was just struck by, I showed up, there's just a line of union trucks and union cars from a bunch of unions, some of which I hadn't even heard of. And so I think the inter-industry solidarity and the recognition that, what happens to an Amazon worker happens to all workers, particularly given that Amazon workers make up a massive percentage of workers in the US now, right? I think that was really striking. I also think it's connected to Amazon unionization efforts like the one in Bessemer, like the one in Staten Island, I actually just spoke to a Staten Island Amazon union worker who says that they're currently in contact with folks at 20 different warehouses in 12 different states across the nation. So I very much do think it's all connected. I think it's just workers asking to be treated as human.
Are we seeing any of the unions that have shown up in solidarity working in conjunction with Amazon workers on the ground about potentially unionizing there? I mean, there are all different types of union strategies where existing unions, local unions will come in and assist, even if it's not necessarily it may not be the same union that Bessemer used, or in Staten Island, they're organizing their own union. Is there any union on the ground that's looking into this, as far as you know?
I don't know if there is a specific union that is the forerunner right now. I do know that the Missouri Workers Center is a group of people that have connections with a lot of different unions that have been talking to the Amazon workers and have been working with them. And so I think that if I were to make a guess, any unionization effort would likely come through there and would likely be very connected to the other ones across the country.
Very interesting. How are the families doing? Has Amazon taken care of the families in any way?
I know that there was some kind of, frankly, token effort towards doing so. Like, I believe Amazon donated about $1 million to relief efforts in Edwardsville, which sounds like a lot, but is really small considering Amazon's profits, right? Yeah. And I do know that, of course, they released practically the equivalent of a Notes app apology, I would say, to the families. I know that one girl I spoke to was actually the cousin of one of the women who was killed in the warehouse. And she started working at another Amazon warehouse the week after her cousin was killed. So I think that really speaks to sort of the conditions and sort of the way that Amazon sees people as interchangeable. Sometimes literally, one woman dies, another woman from her exact same family comes in and starts working. So I would say that the prevailing feeling among workers I spoke to was, no, they're not doing enough to support them.
And in terms of the workers that were affected because this warehouse was crushed, I mean, have they been able to work in other facilities?
I know that most of them have mostly just been transferred to other warehouses in the area. This was not the only warehouse building in the Edwardsville/Greater St. Louis area. There are several. And my sense from speaking with a few workers is just that they were transferred over to other buildings, just kind of slotted in elsewhere in the machine.
Well, this is just, it's such a tragic story, and another example of really the effect that this company, which has had record profits and Bezos's own personal wealth has doubled since the pandemic started. But to the juxtaposition, of course, is really horrible. And why we have labor laws in this country that seem to have withered away. But really, thank you so much for joining us and giving us a breakdown of what's happening. Please keep us in the loop if anything does happen on the ground in terms of unionization. We'd love to have you back on.
Will do. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Sophie. Sophie Hurwitz, her article is out in The Nation right now. Amazon warehouse workers want to feel safe. It was published yesterday. All right, we will be right back. We're going to be talking to Natasha Leonard from The Intercept. All right, guys, we are independent media. Shocker. We don't depend on corporate interests. We are not relying on the big bucks coming in from Google anytime soon. They have definitely not been helping out the left media over the last year and a half. So we are relying on our loyal listeners, the ones who tune in regularly or try to tune in regularly and are committed to supporting progressive independent media. Because let me tell you something, if it doesn't financially work, we don't exist. This is an operation. We have producers. We have to buy lights and sound and all sorts of stuff. It's a lot of work. It may look easy. Some folks like to sit there and stream for 32 hours straight. We actually put a lot of thought into our show and have really incredible guests, but we're able to do that because of our patrons. And it is not only hard to be on the left, it's also very hard to be from marginalized communities, and women in particular are really getting hit hard in the media. So you are definitely our patrons, literally our patrons. If you are not already a patron and you can afford to do so, maybe now's the time. Now is the time. Go to patreon.com/The Nomiki Show. There's lots of swag available to certain patrons. You can get a mug, you can get a bag, you can get some stickers. We have exclusive content. We're going to be doing some meetings in a couple of weeks exclusively for our patrons. Go to patreon.com/The Nomiki Show. And if you are not already listening to us on the other platforms, you can find us on Apple Podcasts, iTunes. You can find us on the whole array. It's going to, yep, there it is, right up on screen. Go check us out in all of the places you can get podcasts, but definitely check us out on Patreon and, of course, Apple Podcasts. Just subscribe to all of them. It doesn't cost, like, if you're on them, just do it. Like, I have like 3 different podcast platforms, maybe 4. That's what you got to do. All right, welcome back to Femme Friday on the Nomiki Show. As always, we are so excited to have Esperanza Fonseca. Esperanza is an Affirm member, the organization Affirm, which is a transnational feminist organization and a labor and policy organizer for, the better part of a decade at this point. Esperanza, hello. Ooh, I'm loving the hair change. I like it.
Thank you. It's so nice to be back with you and see your face and say hi.
Happy New Year. So Esperanza.
Happy New Year.
Thank you. So I want to, there's a lot of news, but I want to start off with something a little funny, but actually there's something deeper here. I don't know if you ever watched Sex and the City, the first, episodes. Yeah. There was this very famous episode where they were in that age when everybody was getting married and they kept having to go to these like baby showers and wedding showers. And of course, people got divorced like a minute later. And then you have to go to the weddings and you spend hundreds of dollars. And, and Sarah Jessica Parker, Carrie, was single. And she was like, why am I paying for this? Why am I paying for your life? And of course, she chose not to. So she decided she was going to do her own version of that and have like a singles registry. Well, the registry thing is out of control because, of course, capitalism, this is what I'm really like leaning towards here. This is from the New York Post, so get ready for that. There are 2 new companies, Fresh Starts Registry and Divorcist. They have sprung up to help recent divorcees put their lives back together one blender at a time, and they have registries for divorce. Late stage capitalism, guys. Late stage capitalism. We will find a way to make money off of every single aspect of your life. I'm still waiting for the singles registry, though, because I do want that. What does this represent to you? I mean, just culturally.
Yeah, I mean, there's a few things that come up for me when you bring this up. The first is that there's this idea in capitalist society that if we just consume more and we buy more commodities and we use more commodities, then that is going to help our mental health or elevate our mood. And I think that what it really is simply temporary fixes that are never enough. And our money is being wasted on consuming all of these commodities we don't really need, and other people are profiting from us. And so once again, I think you're absolutely right. It's just another way to make us into super consumers.
Mm-hmm. And also, if this person who signs up for this registry is going through divorce, and in this article it's quoted that, suddenly I wake up one day and half of my kitchen's gone. And that's a lot. That's a lot of of money to rebuild a household. You know, there are some goods that you have to function with. But if we had a society that, let's say, paid people fair wages and actually provided support during a pandemic, maybe we wouldn't have to be crowdfunding to have a new liver or paying for your groceries or whatever it is, or divorce bills. I mean, there's so many different aspects of how this is somewhat predatory in a sense.
Absolutely, I think it is. And I think it's just a way for companies to sort of swoop in and profit off of some of the hardest moments of people's lives, like a divorce.
Mm-hmm. Yep, exactly. Okay, so switching gears, there's a lot of news right now, and we've done a lot on the BBB, but I do want to show this one clip from MSNBC discussing what Biden can get done right now and what Democrats specifically should run on in 2022. I mean, we played earlier today a clip from The View of all places. Basically, everyone's been radicalized into becoming Bernie Sanders supporters. I won't say that they're quite democratic socialists yet, but they finally were like, what? Whoopi Goldberg was losing her mind on Biden and the Democrats and saying, you know, they don't do anything once they get elected. So I'm very curious to see what MSNBC has to say if The View has gone that far left.
Look, what's possible is possible. And voting rights does not look possible right now. And so that converts into an issue to run on in 2022. On Build Back Better, I think there are pieces of it that he can get through, and not the child tax credit, not free community college, but other pieces of it that are quite important and that will have a real impact on people's lives, and give him new stuff to talk about in addition to what he's done over the past year. So, I think that's the field we're playing on right now.
I think that the premise here is fascinating, right? You know, Democrats converging it with juxtaposing it with The View. The View saying, you know, we do everything to get Democrats elected, and then once they're in office, at least the establishment and those who are in leadership don't do anything. And then you hear this saying, you know, what the Democrats can run on. It's like to win, to hold power, not what they should be passing, not what they should be fighting for and then passing, but what they should run on or what they can pass so that they win. I'm like, I feel like we're like in two different, you know, it's like he needs to like flip his brain a little bit and realize that, you know, human beings are out there and actually need to survive. And if they're not surviving, they're not going to vote for you.
Well, I think this shows the duplicitous nature that is innate and inseparable from the corrupt Democratic Party. I mean, they run on this so-called progressive platform, which in all reality is not that progressive, right? But they can't even fulfill these small promises that they've made to people. Every year, or rather every election year, we're told, just vote for this Democrat and it's going to be better. And in many ways, it's worse. Biden is worse on COVID, in my opinion, than Trump. Biden is worse on, border arrests than Trump. That's not my opinion. That's an objective fact. Child detainees, deportations, all of these things have just escalated since he's gotten elected. And all the Democrats care about, as well as their lackeys, like the man that you just showed, is simply getting them elected. And then when they're elected, they act no different than Republicans, except for a few social issues and, words here and there. And then we're supposed to
not being insurrectionists. That's what I tweeted out last night. Their slogan this year is less insurrection-y. That's it.
And that's why I think for those of us on the left, no matter how you identify, as long as you attach yourself to the Democratic Party, you are going to continue losing credibility in front of the masses. People are not dumb. People are smart. And they look at this and they know it's another fake promise. And if you support that fake promise, then you become as duplicitous as they do. And that's why I think for us to keep our credibility, we have to be real with people. And that means divesting from the Democratic Party once and for all.
It's interesting because it's actually happening with the donor class right now. Like that's how radical, I don't know, radicalized isn't the right word, but they're waking up to some truths about the Democratic Party that many people were aware of, but through the voting rights in particular. So you have this group of like mega donors in the Democratic Party. You're like, we're not giving money to the Democratic Party until you actually do something about voting rights. Well, guess what? They didn't. So now what's going to happen? Like their major funding source is not, I'm very curious. Is that a real threat? Like what's happening next?
I think we'll have to wait and see. But one thing I do want to say is that, as someone who has done, political work, both in the labor movement in California, but also, for example, the housing movement in Oregon, as well as other places around the country, something that makes me incredibly uneasy and feel very unwell is this idea that our institutions, labor, housing rights, etc., the model that they use, their theory of change, is that we want to buddy up with Democratic politicians so that they will make concessions for us. And those concessions are rarely ever made. And it's time for a new strategy, one that understands the need to confront corporate Democrats, not be buddy-buddy with them.
Yeah, you don't ask for power, you take it. You live in Los Angeles, so I have to ask you what's been going on with this recall with Councilmember Bonin. Have you been following this?
I have not been following that too quickly.
So there was this, and let's put this up on screen. Mike Bonin is a council member, progressive, I think, in when you look at the City Council of Los Angeles. There was a recall effort against him. Let's play this clip.
The recall effort against LA City Councilman Mike Bonin has failed. The LA City Clerk's Office reports the recall petition gathered 25,965 signatures, and that is more than 1,300 short of the requirement. Bonin issued a statement yesterday reading in part, quote, "Today is the end to a long, wasteful abuse of the electoral process organized by obstructionists who oppose homeless housing and staffed by right-wing operatives trying to weaken progressives." New at noon.
So I wanted to bring that up because he is one of the more progressive members, and he has, as they said, fought against real estate in particular, supported Bernie Sanders, fought for homeless housing, which is of course an issue everywhere. But in California right now, there's like this insane effort by the right wing. I mean, on one hand, you have the Democratic establishment who's just constantly at war with progressives, but then you have the right wing who's like teaming up with the establishment with these insane recalls in some ways. And it's we're fighting like the corporate Democrats, and then we're fighting QAnon supporters running for office. It's almost too much to handle. Like I'm glad that he wasn't recalled, but what do you think is happening, and how do we fight this? You're a labor organizer. You're used to this.
Yeah. So, I mean, first of all, I think that we need to let the Democrats fight their own fight. Even progressive Democrats are not our friends. They're not on our side. We know, for example, and I've brought this up multiple times, the DSA candidate in LA City Council voted against the People's Movement to fund a gentrifying developer because allegedly that was what is fair. And I think that, once again, what is fair in an exploitative society is always unfair to those of us who are exploited and only fair to those of us doing the exploiting. And so if they want to recall him, let him defend himself. We need to focus on building our own independent movement that is not dependent on the so-called progressive wing of capital. Because as long as we continue electing these Democrats, the upsurge in American fascism is not going to go away. It's only going to continue growing.
Well, what's interesting, I mean, I'm curious, did DSA retract their endorsement? Because we've had that in New York happen. I mean, and that's again, it's like, we give you power, now we're taking it back. They didn't.
No,
they chose
did
not to, or was this a question that was brought up?
I'm not aware if it was brought up, but I know that they did not retract their endorsement. But I think once again, it just shows the sort of futility, or, it's not going to work. Electing Democrats is simply not going to change anything except the PR material. There's going to be trans flags, gay flags, and BLM flags, but it's the same policies.
Well, especially if leadership's the same. I mean, if they're establishment, until you have progressive leadership, which is not on the table anytime soon, because they're the ones who dictate everything. They dictate what committees are on, and so that then everybody, as a result, starts compromising on their beliefs, because power, once they can smell power or losing power, if they're not in a important committee, they are not willing to do what it takes.
Absolutely. And I think that, again, what the task of the left is today is to understand the failure of reformism to change anything for literally anyone. We could pass reforms and they might be good for a couple years, but as long as the fundamental exploitative structure of our society remains, then those reforms will always be reversed. And the left needs to fight for permanent change, which can only come from a revolutionary transformation of our society away from capitalism to socialism.
So, speaking of capitalism, I want to talk a little bit about the organizing that's been happening around this country and the coverage, frankly, because there's been very little coverage in the past of strikes that have occurred right before our eyes. But of course, reporters were not interested. It was not spicy enough. And now suddenly, during a pandemic and the economic collapse, you have mainstream institutions covering this, but then you have new publications like More Perfect Union. So 40 million workers have quit. 100,000, more than 100,000 are on strike. And there are 550 new unions. That was all in 2021. Let's play this clip from start to finish.
During these unprecedented times,
difficult times,
to all of our Amazon retail heroes,
the unsung heroes,
we want to say thank you.
Thank you.
we want to thank you.
The community stepped up and treated us like heroes. But management, they like to call us heroes, but they definitely don't treat us like such.
We feed all these families, but I can't feed mine.
Forced overtime causes divorces. It caused people to kill themselves that used to work here.
You are a number.
I'm hoping for change. I'm hoping for time with our children. I'm hoping for some more money.
During the pandemic, the stores were making a lot of money.
That success was built on us risking our lives every day.
I want to thank every Amazon employee because you guys paid for all this.
It is a sweatshop in there. They treat them like a gigabyte in a system. Even robots break down sometimes.
We are here to stand up for the humanity of the Amazon worker and the humanity of workers across this country. This is just the beginning.
We're done giving up concession by concession. We're done being bullied by a company that makes millions and millions.
John Deere makes $6 billion a year. Well, guess what? My dad may have carried this in 1986. We're back. We're union strong. We've got the community behind us.
A wave of workers' strikes sweeping across America.
Picket lines popping up nationwide.
Right now, 800 nurses are on strike in Worcester.
In Alabama, over 1,000 mine workers are on strike.
And they gonna give us a good contract. We ain't gonna take no bullshit.
I'm so proud to be here today. It might be a little different for a Secretary of Labor coming out and staying on the picket line. They're calling it Striketober.
Strikes giving.
We want the better pay, pension for everybody. It's not for only one group.
I mean, we're looking out for the guys who come next.
Attention Walmart shoppers and associates. My name is Beth from Electronics. I've been working at Walmart for almost 5 years, and I can say that everyone here is overworked and underpaid. This job, I quit.
People are quitting their jobs in droves in what's been dubbed the Great Resignation.
And we all know what happened in Alabama. They sparked a fuse.
We're going to bring the fight to Bezos again this year, Jeff. You're going to negotiate with us soon enough.
Massive win for those John Deere employees. They waited it out.
New hope tonight for New York City's struggling taxi drivers. Many have been on a 2-week hunger strike.
The first company-owned Starbucks to unionize.
For the first time in a long while, the balance of power is shifting away from big businesses.
We've been asked about how long we're willing to fight, and at the end of the day, it's going to be one day longer than they are.
I mean, I'm hyped up, but that one part of this ad where you had Jeff Bezos saying, "Thank you to the Amazon workers, you paid for this penis shipped to space. My little midlife crisis. Thank you so much for paying for this." Don't forget, he landed that day, and there was that tornado that ravaged one of his facilities, and people died because they weren't allowed to leave the facility. They were told not to leave. This is inspiring, of course, but well overdue. I mean, do you think the Capitol, because they're using, I mean, we've had a lot of folks on who talk about anti-insurgent efforts that, these firms that really crack down are union busters. But some folks have said that the tactics are the same. And so the more people know about the tactics, the harder it's going to be for them to crack down. And of course, more folks are going to be inspired to unionize, to quit, to use their labor as a tool of power. What do you think?
Yeah, so one, the tactics absolutely are the same, both on our side, but also on theirs. They might have more funding, but it's always the same. Captive audience meetings, intimidation, surveillance, threats. And workers need to be prepared that when you go up and stand with your coworkers against the boss, your boss is going to surveil you, threaten you, make you promises, incentivize you to not join the union, throw you in captive audience meetings where they attempt to intimidate you. All of those things are illegal, but it doesn't mean they won't do it. And that's why workers have to be prepared to document it and prepared to talk to each other for what we call inoculation, which is basically getting people fight ready. When you know you're about to start a union drive, you have to be ready and get your coworkers and friends ready for the retaliation that we know is coming. But it doesn't mean that we are powerless to it. Even under Trump's NLRB, my friend who was an H&M worker, Nick Gallant, that we were organizing with, he was fired by H&M for organizing his coworkers after, female coworkers were literally trapped in the building when there was a fire. They would lock doors on them, steal their money. And guess what? He was fired for organizing, and we fought H&M under Trump's handpicked NLRB, and we won. And if it's possible under Trump, it's definitely possible now. But you have to be militant enough and willing to see the fight through to the end.
Love it. Turn that into an ad. Okay, so on that note, I want to just juxtaposition here. While I was doing the ad earlier today, during one of the breaks, I saw this pop up on Instagram, and I just had to post it because see these and it drives me crazy. This woman, she was a reporter, Nina. Can you zoom in just a little bit because it's hard for me to read? Nina Strominger. Nina Strominger said she asked Wharton students, of course, where the Trumps went, business school, what they thought the average American worker makes per year. And 25% of them thought it was over six figures. One of them thought it was $800,000. That's average. Really not sure what to make of this. The real number is $45,000 per year. And even that, is that full-time work. Of course, we're just putting that in context. $45,000 a year. These schools are breeding little elitists. This is insane. And these are the people who are running the companies who are supposedly out of touch. They know. I mean, this is what I'm sorry. These are Wharton students who this is a business school. They are looking at budgets. They should know what they're paying their workers once they take over. Once they're the CFOs of these companies or mini executives or middle management, they should be aware of what they're paying their workers.
Well, Nomiki, we are not people to them. Workers are not people to the exploiting class in the US. We are sacrificial work robots that they will use until we're all used up, and then they'll throw us out on the streets to die, which is exactly what they did during COVID. I saw this professor's tweet, and what I find even more heinous and more insidious is that she followed up saying, I don't think it really says anything about the students at Wharton. I think that what it says, something along the lines of most people underestimate the gap between rich and poor. But that is BS. If you go to a community college in a working class neighborhood and you ask students what the average income is, I bet you anything it's going to be a lot closer to reality, if not even lower than what the actual average income is in the US. Mm-hmm. And the fact that you could have a PhD and teach at a business school and still have no idea what class means or how class manifests itself in the United States shows the failure of the academy in the US, but also the way that it acts as a propaganda tool to maintain the status quo. And it's not that they're just unaware or ignorant. It's that we're not people to them. And it's that, this is the ideology that they were raised on,
Going back to the Bezos quote, he said it. I mean, if for the podcast listeners, when you look at that part where Jeff Bezos is sitting there in his blue jumpsuit, he has astronauts and scientists next to him, some of whom are not billionaires or not his best friends. And there was one woman that was to the right of him, who I believe is an astronaut. Her jaw dropped when he said that, in a flippant, insulting way. Thank you to the Amazon workers who helped me do this. And her jaw dropped. Also jaw dropping. So simultaneously, we have government that is continuing to put means testing and austerity on Americans. And I cannot believe this story. This is Delaware. Delaware is, of course, credit card capital of the country. Delaware has all these tax breaks, and that is where Joe Biden is from. So millions of Americans are facing suspended licenses because of outstanding debt. Debt-based suspensions trap workers in impossible situations. If they can't drive, they can't go to work, and then they pay the fees to reinstate their license. I can't believe this. Finally, there's somebody who's presenting a bill, but let's just play a little bit of this clip and comment on it.
That's what this is all about. It's all about money.
There's a huge problem with our justice system that you've probably never heard about. Millions of Americans currently have their driver's licenses suspended due to court fines and fees that they are unable to pay. This punishment for poverty leads to lost jobs and endless cycles of debt that trap working class people in the criminal justice system.
It's happened more than once.
I used to be a drug dealer, and they gave me 4 years in prison. And they suspended my license and gave me, I think it was a $15,000 fine. In order to reinstate my license, I gotta pay a fee of $289.
If you get out of jail and you don't have what it is that you need to pay, it might make someone likely to resort back to the life of crime that led them into jail in the first place. And that's extremely problematic. It's a circle that is vicious.
So how do these license suspensions work? Across the country, courts fine people to punish them for crimes and charge them court fees that then fund the criminal justice system. When a person can't pay, they often have their driver's license suspended.
You gotta pay. You gotta pay the court costs. I had a public defender, so I had to pay a fee for that. And you don't realize that you're being charged these fees.
Let's say that someone is driving and a police officer picks up that they're speeding and they get pulled over for a speeding ticket. They have substance abuse disorder, and he discovers a small amount of fentanyl in the car. They take a plea offer to a misdemeanor possession of drugs, and they get sentenced to low-level probation, substance abuse evaluation, and court costs. If you have money, you pay that off, and you don't get it on your record, and it's done. If you do not have money, you get put on a payment plan. If you miss one of those payments, most of the courts in Delaware then automatically suspend your driver's license. A lot of times people don't know their driver's license is suspended, so they then continue driving, and then to really play this out, often get pulled over for, let's say, another speeding ticket, and then turns into a more serious offense of driving on a suspended license.
We know what the consequences are to not having a car and being able to operate in most of this country that does not have public transportation. But of course, this isn't just people who go to prison, as they mentioned. This is folks who might have, a fee for something else, court fee, but it is extremely difficult when you're coming out of being incarcerated or being held and you don't have, especially if you're incarceration, you may not be able to access employment. And so there's all this compounding pressure. Can't go back. If you're in public housing, you can't go back and live there, by the way. It's very, very difficult. And then, we wonder why we have, it's a racket. It's like a giant racket, man.
Yeah, it's actually really horrible. And there's two things that come up for me for this. The first is that, this is what it looks like to live under a dictatorship, not the kind of dictatorship the US ruling class wants to scare us about, the facade they've turned the DPRK into or other countries. I'm talking about the dictatorship of capital. Okay, wage theft is the most common form of theft in the country, and yet employers face no consequences to it. They don't have their licenses revoked. They don't have their ability to travel revoked. All of their rights and privileges are maintained, despite the billions of dollars that they steal from workers every single year. And yet those of us who are working class are the ones who are facing these burdens and these problems. We have to understand this is a dictatorship of capital. And until we fundamentally change which class is in power, these things are going to keep happening. And then the second thing is, Brett from Rev Left Radio made a very accurate comment, in my opinion, which is that right now, the US is in decline. And I think we all see it, right? I'm 30 now. The world is not the same as it was when I was 18. It's a lot different and it's a lot worse. Mm-hmm. And the only way for the US to save itself while maintaining its basic class structure is to embrace social democracy. But it's not going to do that. What it's going to do is continue to push austerity until we enter, in my opinion, full barbarism. And I think we see this already happening with COVID. And this is the model that's going to be used as climate and other sort of so-called natural catastrophes continue to plague us.
And it's horrifying because if they don't have workers to produce, I mean, if we're a consumer-based economy in capitalism and they're so flippant about workers and workers can't consume because they don't have jobs, I just don't understand how they see this playing out. It's barbarism is an accurate way of saying it, and great to end on a bright note. Barbarism, get ready.
Unless we want to organize for something better, which we absolutely can do. And that's why I think every single viewer really has to find it in themselves to get connected with other people, join an organization, and tap into this fight.
Absolutely. Esperanza Fonseca, you're like a preacher. Thank you.
Thank you, Nomiki.
You're like a commie preacher.
I'm just an organizer. And if there's one thing I could do is just inspire people to just tap into this fight, because we need everyone.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for joining us, as always, and happy Femme Friday to everybody. Make sure to check out the show on Tuesday. We do, Tuesday. God, I'm forgetting. We do TNS Live, where we have longer sit-down conversations at 8 p.m., starting off on Rockfin and YouTube, but we finish it off on rockfin.com/Nomiki. And of course, check out the show on Wednesday and Friday. Thank you to everybody for joining us. And as always, stay in solidarity.
The Nomiki Show. Clash momentarily for class solidarity. Cash circulating, give the masses back its currency. Greed from a leech, oligarchs stay fed. Deep state, fake fed, everybody break bread. Racism, homophobia, sexism, religion in this melting pot we live in. Time to build a new system, unionize labor rights. Highlight the issue, talking heads left is best. The saga continues. The Nomiki Show.